Part 3. Lower Fire Month. 9th month. Day 3. 4:35. The place he headed to was a large hall. An entire floor of the tower had been emptied to serve as a training area. Normally, the place would be radiating the heat of soldiers going about their trainings. However, it was deserted this early in the day. The empty space was quiet. One could almost hear the silence. Because there was stone in every direction, the sound of Climb's footsteps rang out loudly. The hall was brightly lit from the semi-permanent light of the magic fire. Inside, there was armor mounted on stakes and hay dolls to act as archery targets. The walls were lined with weapon racks, filled with various arms that were left unsharpened. Ordinarily, a training area should be set up outdoors, but there was a reason that it was decided to have it inside. The city of Rolente was home to Valencia Castle. Having the soldiers train outside would mean they would be seen by foreign ambassadors. To avoid the risk of appearing low class, numerous areas within the tower were cleared out to serve as training areas. A demonstration of strong soldiers dauntlessly practicing their drills would have diplomatic benefits, but the kingdom did not see it as such. More than anything, there was a trend to seem as elegant, splendid, and high-born. With that said, there were still drills that were impossible to conduct indoors. They would either be done discreetly in a corner or on a field outside the castle, albeit inside the capital. Climb entered the quiet hall as if he were cutting through the cool air, and slowly started to stretch in the corner. 30 minutes later, after a thorough stretching session, Climb's face was reddened, his forehead was drenched with sweat, and his labored breaths were heavy with heat. Climb wiped the sweat from his forehead and approached the weapons rack. Checking the grip, he made sure that it fit securely in his hands. His palms were already rough and hard from the numerous blisters that came and went. Next, he filled his pockets with chunks of metal and buttoned them tightly as to prevent them from falling out. The many pieces of metal that filled his clothes made it as heavy as full plate armor. Regular plate armor, without any magical enchantments, provided an excellent defense at the cost of one's freedom of movement. Keeping actual battles in mind, training with it equipped was the right course of action. But even so, it was rare to bring out full plate armor for mere training, not to mention the white armor that he was given. That was why he was using the metal chunks as an alternative. Climb gripped the iron weapon that exceeded the size of a greatsword and held it over his head. He slowly brought down the sword, exhaling as he did so. Stopping just before it struck the floor, he breathed in and raised the sword to its original position over his head. He stared at the space in front of him with sharp eyes, completely absorbed in his training, as he gradually raised the speed of his swings. He had already finished 300 swings. Sweat poured down from Climb's completely reddened face. His breaths were hot, as if he were expelling the built-up heat in his body. Although Climb trained arduously as a soldier, it was difficult to handle the weight of the large greatsword. Stopping the blade before it touched the ground was especially challenging. Such a feat required a great deal of strength. As the count of his swings reached 500, his arms started to cramp, and felt as if they were screaming out in pain. Sweat fell from his face like a waterfall. Climb knew very well that was his limit. Despite this, he showed no signs of stopping. However,
"Perhaps that is far enough."
Hearing the voice of another, Climb quickly turned in the direction of the voice, and his eyes reflected the figure of a man. Calling him burly would have been an understatement. The man was like the embodiment of steel. The wrinkles in his face were reminiscent of rock, and made him look older than he actually was. His bulging muscles made it evident that this was no ordinary man which stood before him. There was no soldier in the kingdom who did not know him.
"Mr. Stronov!"
Warrior Captain Gazef Stronov, lauded as the strongest in the kingdom, and unmatched even in the surrounding nations.
"Any further would be overtraining. There is no meaning in pushing yourself so far."
Climb lowered his sword and stared at his trembling arms. You are correct. I overdid it slightly. Seeing Climb's expressionless face as he gave his thanks, Gazef shrugged his shoulders.
If that is what you truly think, could you not make me repeat myself so often? How many times does this make it?
I apologize. Gazef shrugged once more as Climb lowered his head. This was a conversation that had been repeated countless times between them, like a greeting of sorts. Usually, this was where their exchange would end, and each man would pursue his own training. But today was different.
How about it, Climb? Would you like to try crossing swords?
At Gazef's words, Climb's blank expression almost faltered for an instant. Up until now, they had never crossed swords upon meeting at this location. It was their unwritten rule. There was nothing to be gained even if they were to train together. It wouldn't be completely fruitless, but the cons greatly outweighed the pros. There was currently a power struggle between the king's faction and an alliance between 3 of the 6 great noble families. The situation was dangerous enough for there to be rumors that the only reason the kingdom was not split was because of the yearly war against the empire. In the midst of that struggle, if the personal confidant of the king, Gazef Stronov, though highly unlikely, were to lose, it would be a great boon to the noble faction. On the other hand, the nobles would jump at the obvious outcome of Climb's defeat to whisper that he was unfit to protect Renaer. There were many who disliked the idea of the beautiful, unmarried princess trusting a lone soldier with her protection, one with an uncertain background no less. Both were in a position where they could not lose. They could not appear weak, to show a weak point that could be exploited in an attack. The two were of one mind, that they were both carefully cautious as not to hurt their respective masters. For what reason would he break the unwritten rule? Climb looked around his surroundings. Because there was no one else here? That was unthinkable. This was an abode of demons. There was no end to those who would watch from afar or observe them while hidden, but he could not think of any other reason. Unable to figure out his intentions, Climb did not allow his puzzling agitation to show on his face. The man standing in front of Climb was a warrior, hailed as the strongest in the kingdom. Keenly sensing the brief instance of emotion that an ordinary person might miss, he spoke.
Only recently, something occurred to me that made me realize I was lacking. I would like to practice with someone who is competent.
You did, Sir Stronov? Gazef, the strongest in the kingdom, just what sort of incident would make him feel inadequate? Climb suddenly remembered that the number of troops in Gazef's unit had decreased. Climb did not have any close comrades, so he had heard it as a rumor circulating around the mess hall. According to the story, they had lost a number of their troops after being embroiled in an incident.
Yes, if I had not met the merciful magic caster, if he had not lent us his strength, I would not be here right now.
Hearing this, Climb felt his iron mask crumble. Who could not remain unsurprised? Before he knew it, Climb's curiosity had gotten the better of him, and he posed a question. Who was that merciful magic caster?
He called himself Eins Ulgon. This is just a hunch, but I feel he may rival even that monster of a magic caster in the Empire.
He had never heard of that name. Climb looked up to the heroes, and he had a hobby of collecting stories of their feats. He ignored their races, and even collected stories of famous adventurers from nearby countries. But even so, the name Gazef spoke just now was completely unfamiliar to him. Of course, there was a possibility that it was an alias.
Then...
Climb held back the desire to question him further. Trying to ask him about an incident that cost him his soldiers. Even rudeness has its limits. I will engrave his name on my heart. But is it really fine for us to spar?
Not a spar. Simply crossing swords. What you get out of it solely depends on you. You yourself are a first-rate soldier amongst the country's troops. It should benefit me as well.
Although it was high praise, to Climb they were simply empty words. It wasn't that Climb was particularly strong, only that the standard was low. The skills of a soldier in the kingdom were only slightly better than that of its ordinary citizens. Even compared to the knights, the Empire's enlisted soldiers, they were weak. There was also no one in the nearby countries with military distinction. Gazef's troops were indeed strong, but even so, compared to Climb, they fell slightly short. If Climb were to evaluate himself according to the ranks of adventurers, with copper, iron, silver, gold, platinum, mithril, orichalcum, and adamantite, he would be gold. Not weak, but there were many above him. Could someone like that be considered worthwhile to a man like Gazef? A man who would, without doubt, be placed in adamantite class? Climb shook off such weak thoughts. The strongest man in the kingdom was offering to train him. This kind of experience would not come often. Even if the end result was that he disappointed Gazef, there would be no regrets. "Then I ask for your guidance." Gazef grinned and eagerly nodded his head. The two approached the weapons rack and each picked out a sword that fit his size. Gazef chose a bastard sword, Climb a small shield and broadsword. Climb then took out the metal chunks from his pockets. Facing someone stronger than himself with them was a discourtesy. Not only that, he would have to fight with everything he had for the training to benefit his growth. His opponent was the strongest warrior in the kingdom. As previously said, a tall, thick wall must be felt with one's full strength. Now that Climb was finished with his preparations, Gazef asked, "How are your arms? Are they still sore?" "Yes, I am fine now. They are slightly worn, but will not be a problem for my grip." Climb flexed both hands. Seeing that he was telling the truth, Gazef once again nodded. "I see. That is a shame in its own way. One will rarely be in perfect condition on the battlefield. If your grip suffers, then you must fight in a way to compensate it. Have you ever trained with those conditions?" No, I have not. Then I will resume my swings and... No. No need to go that far. But since you are responsible for the safety of the princess, you would do well to learn how to fight in situations where carrying a sword is forbidden. Perhaps also verse yourself in handling various weapons. Yes. Sword, shield, spar, axe, dagger, gauntlets, bow, cudgel, and thrown weapons. It's training for these 9 types of weapons that serve as the foundation for armed combat. However, if you stretch yourself too thin, then everything will suffer. It would be better for you to narrow it down to 2 or 3 weapons, and learn from there. It seems I've said something unnecessary. Not at all, Sir Stronov. Thank you very much. Gazef wore a bitter smile and answered with a wave of his hand. If you are ready to begin, then let us start. First, try attacking me in that stance. Soon, yes, I will not be able to spar with you, but I can teach you some tactics using the 9 weapons. Yes, then I will be in your care. Come, but I have no intention of treating this as training. Consider this to be the real thing, an attack. Climb slowly lowered his sword and turned the left side of his body, covered by the shield, toward Gazef's direction. His gaze was sharp, and his senses already knew that this was not training. Likewise, Gazef exuded a presence that alerted him that this was a real fight. The two glared at one another, but Climb could not make the first move. Even if removing the metal chunks made it easier for him to move, Climb did not think he could beat Gazef. In both strength and experience, Gazef was overwhelmingly above him. Simply closing the distance would be immediately met with a counterattack. His opponent, being a master who was leagues above him, could not be helped. But if this were a real fight, could he simply roll over and die because of something like that? Then what could he do? He had to fight with a factor that Gazef did not possess. Body, experience, and mind, Climb lost in everything that was necessary for a warrior. The difference was in their equipment. Gazef wielded a bastard sword. On the other hand, Climb had a broadsword and a small shield. If they were magic weapons, then it would be different, but these were used for training, and there was no disparity in that regard. Gazef only had one weapon, while Climb possessed two, since a shield could be used as a weapon as well. This also meant that he had more ways to attack at the cost of dividing his strength. Block the first attack with the shield and slash with the sword, parry with the sword and strike with the shield. Having decided on a counter as his strategy, Climb focused on observing Gazef's movements. After several seconds had passed, Gazef showed a smile.
"Are you not coming? Then I will attack. Right now."
His calm demeanor absolute, Gazef readied his stance. Hips slightly lowered, strength began to mount in his body like a spring. Climb as well. He gathered strength in his body so he could block the blade, no matter when it came. Gazef closed in and swung down his sword while aiming for the shield. Fast! Climb gave up the notion of moving his shield to deflect the blow. He focused his entire mind and body on defending, just blocking the attack. The next moment, his shield was seized by an enormous impact. The level of force was enough to make him think that the shield had shattered. It was an attack powerful enough to paralyze the hand that held the shield. Withstanding such an impact would require the strength of one's entire body. Deflect it? How do you match the timing for something like this? Just the shock is enough to... Climb's naive thoughts left him vulnerable. He felt another impact on his abdomen. Gah! His body flew backwards, his back colliding with the hard stone floor and expelling the air from his lungs. A glance at Gazef made it plain to see what had happened. Just now he was lowering his leg that had delivered a powerful kick to Climb.
"Even if it's the only weapon in my hand, it is dangerous to focus solely on the sword. Like now, you could be hit with a kick. I aimed for your stomach just now, but normally it would be where the armor is lighter. I may break your knees, even if you were wearing a pad over your crotch. If you're unlucky, armored boots will crush them. Observe your opponent's whole body and watch every movement."
Yes. Climb endured the dull pain from his abdomen and slowly stood. The kingdom's strongest, Gazef Stronov's physical strength was truly formidable. If he had kicked more seriously, then it would not have been a problem to break Climb's ribs through the chain shirt and render him unable to fight. The reason that was not the case here was because Gazef held back and merely touched Climb's stomach with the foot, and pushed him with the intent to knock him back. "It was an instructional spar after all. Thank you." Realizing that the kingdom's strongest had sparred with him, Climb was grateful as he resumed his stance. He had to be careful, so this precious moment did not end abruptly. Climb once again raised his shield and slowly edged towards Gazef. Gazef wordlessly stared at him as he approached. If this continued, it would only be a repeat of what just happened. Climb had to devise a new plan as he approached. Gazef waited, exuding an overwhelming calm. There was just no way to make him fight seriously. It would be arrogant to feel angry about that, though. Climb's limit was already visible. Despite waking up early to train in his swordsmanship, his progress was as slow as a snail. Compared to when he first started training, it was still too slow. Going forward, even if he could train his body and raise the speed and weight of his sword, skills like martial arts would still be out of his reach. For someone like Climb, to feel angry over the fact that the man who was the embodiment of talent did not fight him seriously would be disrespectful. He who was unable to draw out the man's full strength could only blame his own lack of ability. His words from before told him not to treat this as training, and to attack in earnest was a warning. It meant, attack with the intent to kill, or you do not even stand a chance. A warning like that came from a man who stood in a place far above himself. Climb clenched his teeth. He hated his own weakness. If he was only stronger, then he could be of more use. He could become her weapon and fight directly against those who would dirty the kingdom and harm its peoples. The fact that her only sword was so weak that she had to be careful of where to point it filled Climb with guilt. However, he immediately tossed aside such thoughts. What he had to do now was to not lose himself in negativity. He had to throw everything he had at the man who stood in the world of the strong, so he himself could grow stronger, no matter how small a quantity that was. Only one thought filled his heart: to be of help to the princess. Oh? Gazef let out a sigh and slightly changed his expression. It was because the face of the one who was before him, both a boy and a man, had changed. If he were to compare, up until now, he was like a child who met a celebrity and could not contain his excitement. That restlessness had vanished after the kick and was replaced with the face of a warrior. Gazef raised his level of alertness a single notch. More so than Climb had realized, Gazef had a high opinion of him. In particular, his single-minded, avaricious pursuit of strength, his loyalty that bordered on religious fervor, and his swordsmanship. Climb's swordplay was not something that had been taught. He had obtained it by sneaking peeks at others who were in the midst of their training. It was unsightly and full of excessive movements. But unlike those who trained mindlessly, each motion of his blade was meticulously thought out and developed for practical use. To put it badly, he became a sword to kill. Gazef thought it was very splendid. A sword was ultimately a tool for murder. One that was trained casually would not be able to display its effectiveness in a real fight. It would not be able to protect those who must be protected. It would not be able to save those who must be saved. But Climb was different. He would cut down his enemy and protect the one important to him. However,
even if you steeled your resolve, the difference in skill with your opponent is still grave. Now, what will you do?
Assuredly, Climb had no talent. Even if he worked harder than anyone else, no matter how hard he pushed his body, without talent, he would not be able to become strong. He would not be able to reach men like Gazef or Brian Unglaus. Even if Climb wanted to be stronger than anyone else, it could only happen in dreams and fantasies. Then why was he giving Climb a spar? Would it not be more useful to spend his time on someone with more talent? The answer was simple. Gazef could not stand by and watch Climb endlessly repeat his useless efforts. If talent was the wall that decided the limits of humans, he took pity on the boy and his unending, reckless charge against that wall. That was why he wished to teach him a different method. He believed that although there was a limit on talent, there was no limit on experience. And because of the anger he felt at the pitiful figure of his once greatest rival,
but even so, trying to get satisfaction from elsewhere, I owe Climb an apology. But facing me should be more useful for this guy as well. Attack me, Climb.
At the words he spoke to himself, a powerful shot came back in response. Yes! Climb ran as soon as he answered. Gazef, with a serious expression that was different from before, slowly raised his sword over his shoulder. It was the stance for a vertical attack above the waist. Blocking it with a shield would completely restrict his own movements, and parrying it with the sword would blow him back. It was an attack that rendered the act of defending meaningless. Blocking it was foolish, but Climb's broadsword was shorter than his bastard sword. The only option was to run forward. Knowing this, Gazef was waiting to counterattack. It was the same as jumping into the mouth of a tiger, but his hesitation only lasted an instant. Climb launched himself into the range of Gazef's sword. As if he was waiting for this moment, Gazef's sword was brought down and crashed into Climb's shield. The tremendous impact was even stronger than before. Climb twisted his face at the pain that was transmitted into his arm.
A pity. The same outcome as before.
With a slight hint of disappointment, Gazef's foot reached at Climb's abdomen and... Fortress! With Climb's shout, Gazef wore a slightly surprised expression. The activation of the martial art Fortress was not limited only to the sword or shield. It was possible to use it on any part of the body. The reason that one would normally activate it when blocking with his weapons was simply because it was very difficult to find the correct timing for anything else. Using it on armor carried the risk of receiving your opponent's attack without any defenses. Reserving the skill for blocking with the sword or shield was simple common sense. However, the problem was solved if one could predict his opponent's next move, like Climb did with Gazef's kick.
Were you aiming for this?
Yes! The power behind Gazef's kick disappeared as if it were absorbed by something soft. Unable to channel strength into his extended leg, Gazef gave up on the attempt and tried to bring his foot back down to the ground. Catching him in a disadvantageous position, Climb struck. Slash! A martial art high slash. Just have one single skill that you can use with confidence. Taking the words he had heard from a certain warrior to heart, this was the attack that the talentless Climb practiced day in and day out. Climb's body was not wrapped by an armor of muscles. From the start, his constitution was never one for that type of figure. Even if he did build up muscle, he could not keep his agility. Because of this, his body was forged into a specialization through endless repetition. The result was a straight, vertical slash, a high-speed attack that bordered on the realm of absurdity. Like a flash of light, a slash that seemed to summon the gale. The attack was coming down on top of Gazef's head. In Climb's mind, the thought that the blow connecting would result in a fatal injury had vanished completely. It was a technique that was only possible due to the unwavering confidence that the man named Gazef would not die to something of this level. With the roaring sound of metal, the bastard sword was raised up to meet the broadsword coming down. Everything so far was expected. Climb poured all the strength in his body into an attempt to break Gazef's balance. However, Gazef's body did not budge. Even in the awkward position of standing on one leg, he easily held off the attack that had Climb's full strength behind it. He was like a gigantic tree with thick roots embedded in the earth. His strongest attack with everything he had, combined with 2 martial arts, and Climb still could not match Gazef standing on one leg. Despite his surprise, Climb's eyes still moved to his own abdomen. The fact that he brought down his broadsword meant that their distance had shortened. It also meant that Gazef could again kick him in the stomach. The kick landed on Climb's body as soon as he leapt back. There was a small, dull pain. The two stood face to face, with a few paces of distance separating them. Gazef slightly relaxed his eyes and eased his lips. Although he smiled, it was not unpleasant, but refreshing. It made Climb feel slightly ashamed. To him, it looked like the smile of a father seeing the growth of his son.
That was splendid! I will be a bit more serious then.
Gazef's expression changed. Climb felt goosebumps all over his body. The strongest in the kingdom had finally shown himself.
I've a potion with me, so there is no need to worry. It can heal fractures.
Thank you. The taciturn way Gazef implied that he should be prepared for broken bones made Climb's heart thump loudly in his chest. He was used to injuries, but that did not mean he enjoyed them. Gazef closed in at twice Climb's speed. The bastard sword drew an arc that was low enough to skid the ground and slashed at Climb's legs. Its speed, filled with rotational force, Climb quickly stabbed his own broadsword into the ground in an attempt to protect his legs. The two sides collided. At the least, that is what Climb believed. In that instant, Gazef's sword changed course and rode up the side of his broadsword.
Gah!
Climb leaned his body back, and the sword flew inches past his face. The wind from the slash severed a few strands of hair as it passed by. Fearful at the fact that Gazef had cornered him this badly, this quickly, Climb saw in his vision the bastard sword had halted and was quickly coming back. Before he could even think, his survival instinct caused Climb to push forward with the small shield. The bastard sword crashed into the shield, and a loud metallic sound rang out. And... Ugh! Climb felt intense pain as he was blown away to the side. The impact as his body crashed violently to the floor forced his sword from his hand. The bastard sword that had collided with the small shield had moved upwards and delivered a severe blow to Climb's flank.
It's the flow, not simply attacking and defending. You must move so that every action can flow into your next attack. Your defense must serve as a part of your next assault.
Gazef spoke to Climb in a gentle voice while he picked up his sword and attempted to get up while holding his side.
I controlled my strength so it wouldn't break. You should be able to continue. What will you do?
Gazef, who did not even seem tired, and Climb, tense and heaving with pain. This ugly sight of not being able to even last a few strikes, he was just wasting Gazef's time. Even so, Climb wanted to be stronger, no matter how slightly. Raising his sword, he nodded to Gazef and resumed his stance.
Very well. Let us continue.
Yes! With a hoarse shout, Climb charged. Beaten, flung about, and sometimes even resorting to punches and kicks, Climb collapsed to the floor with labored breaths. The cold chill of the ground felt pleasant as it absorbed his body heat through the chain shirt. He did not try to wipe away the sweat. No, he did not even have the energy to do so. Enduring the stabs of pain, Climb, unable to resist the fatigue rising all throughout his body, closed his eyes slightly.
Good work. I tried not to break or crack anything, but how is it?
Sprawled out on the floor, Climb moved his hands and touched the parts that still gave him pain.
I don't think there are any problems. Painful, but they're only bruises.
The ringing pain was light. It would not be a hindrance to the princess's security.
Is that so? Then we will not need the potion.
Yes. After all, careless use will cancel out the effects of muscle training.
Indeed, they should be left to heal naturally, but magic will end up restoring the muscles to their original state. I assume you will be returning to your duties as the princess's guard?
Yes.
Then take it with you. Use it should anything happen.
With a clink, the potion bottle was set next to Climb.
Thank you.
He raised himself and looked at Gazef, at the man his sword could not touch even once. The man without a scratch looked at him strangely, and spoke on.
What is it?
Nothing. I just thought you were amazing.
His breathing was steady, with almost no traces of sweat on his forehead. Climb breathed a sigh. He realized that this was the difference between him, who was on the floor, and the strongest in the kingdom. On the other hand, Gazef wore a bitter smile.
I see.
How?
Even if you ask me how I am so strong, I have no answer to give you. It is simply talent. I learned how to fight during my days as a mercenary. These kicks, that all the nobles call vulgar, I learned them during those days as well.
There was no trick to gaining strength, Gazef declared. The hope that adopting the same training would, to an extent, help him grow stronger was easily dashed.
Climb. You have potential in that sense. Punching and kicking, using your fists to fight.
Is that so?
Indeed. In fact, it is rather fortunate that you were not trained as a swordsman or a soldier. When one holds a sword, he tends to focus on fighting while only using that weapon. I believe this is wrong. Change our view of the sword to see it as just another way of attacking while incorporating the fists and legs. That would be more effective in a real battle. Well, my sword is more suited for adventurers.
Climb's usual blank face was gone and replaced with a smile. He did not expect the strongest in the kingdom to praise his skills so highly, his unorthodox movements and skills devoid of framework. The sword that the nobles mocked behind his back was being praised. His joy was immense.
Well then, I will take my leave. I must not be late to the king's morning meal. Will you be heading back?
No, there is supposed to be a guest today.
A guest? A noble, perhaps?
As Gazef thought it strange that the princess would be receiving a guest, Klein responded.
Yes, Lady Indra will be visiting.
Indra? Ah, but which Indra are you referring to? The blue one, right? Not the crimson.
Yes, Blue Rose.
The relief on Gazef's face was obvious at a glance.
Right, that's what it was. If a friend is visiting...
Gazef must have guessed the reason Klein was not invited for breakfast was because a friend was coming. In truth, Klein was the one who turned down her offer. Even if he was in a position where such a thing was allowed, to refuse the royal family, even Gazef would furrow his brows at the news. That was why Klein remained silent on the matter and left it to the man's imagination. Even Indra herself, who was acquainted with Klein through Renaer, requested that he join them. She would not share the adverse reaction of the other nobles, even if Klein were to join their meal. This was his consideration for his master, who had very few female friends. A princess had almost no opportunity to engage in lady talk, and Klein felt that his absence would be for the best.
Thank you for your guidance today, Sir Gazef.
Not at all. Pay it no mind. I enjoyed myself as well.
If it isn't too much trouble, could I ask you to oversee my training next time as well?
Gazef paused briefly. Before Klein could apologize, he spoke.
I see no problem with it, if we keep to it when others are absent.
Klein didn't open his mouth. He clearly understood the reason for the man's hesitation. Then he forced his creaking body to stand, in order to show his sincerity.
Thank you very much.
Gazef slowly waved his hand and turned.
I will leave the cleanup to you. It will be troubling if I miss the meal. Ah, right. That vertical slash wasn't bad, but you should keep your next move in mind. Think of what will happen next if your opponent blocks or avoids your attack.
Yes,